If New Orleans Saints running back Alvin Kamara were ever to be traded, it would not be by his own request. We got all of that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, I'm going to give you the updates on all of the injured players that Dennis Allen updated on, including those that could potentially return to the field against the Chargers on Sunday. We'll take a look at the Saints bringing in a veteran wide receiver for a workout. Why they should still add him, but it's not necessarily going to move the needle for the team's success. And then to kick everything off today, we're going to get started with a look at Alvin Kamara, who took to social media to debunk a false and bogus trade request. If Alvin Kamara is going to be traded, it's not going to be by his own request. We got all that and much more coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by Hillsdale College. Head over to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to get started. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. Well, look, it's nearly the trade deadline. When it comes to the trade deadline, that means that there's going to be trade rumors. And that also means that there are going to be people out there looking for internet clout. And this past weekend, we saw exactly that exercise in full practice where someone decided to take to social media and to post a bogus Alvin Kamara trade request kind of quote unquote report. I use the word report loosely because it was a lie. But this is something that we see all the time around this time of year because the trade deadline's on the way. Remember, the trade deadline is a week later this year because the NFL finally made that adjustment for the 17-game schedule, 18-week schedule. And so these types of things are going to happen. But sometimes trade requests are so inflammatory, these little rumors, all those other things, that players feel the need to take to social media to clarify for themselves that this is not the case. And that's exactly what Alvin Kamara did. After the report came out and started to circulate and pick up traction, despite how much we said that it was false, it still picked up traction. And in picking up that traction, Alvin Kamara then felt the need to take to social media and say, I didn't request any trade. I'm not trying to get out of here. Nothing like that. Stop paying attention to these false reports, basically. And then also confirmed, as we've discussed here, and as he has told me personally, and as I have asked him on camera, he also confirmed again that he has every intent to try to find a way to finish his career here in New Orleans. Remember, this is a running back that started the season in a contract dispute, not because he wanted more money, not because he wanted more money here in 2024, but because he wanted some type of commitment for 2025. Right now, Alvin Kamara carries a $29 million cap hit in 2025, which means this is the last year of his contract. This is a contract year. And one of the reasons why you can tell that trade request post or story was false is that they didn't understand how the contract worked. And so they were talking about the contract being $29 million next year, which will be the last year of his deal. No, that will not be the last year of his deal. This is the last year of his deal, unless an extension gets done that gives him further commitment moving ahead to 2025. But until that gets done, this is Alvin Kamara's final contract year. And you can tell by the way that the New Orleans Saints have been running him, right? This is something that NFL teams do all the time. You get your running back into the final contract year of his career, then you run him into the ground, and then you see if he comes out on the other side. And then if he does, then maybe you consider extending him at that point. But look, if the Saints end up moving on at any point from Alvin Kamara, it will not be from Alvin Kamara's decision. It will not be from Alvin Kamara's choice. It will not be Alvin Kamara that is the impetus or catalyst for that move getting done, trade or otherwise. It will be the New Orleans Saints making a decision at that point. And so I do want to embark on that conversation a little bit. Why would the New Orleans Saints make that point? If they made that choice, the biggest thing that you have to take a look at is that the Saints would effectively be in fire sale mode. And that's why I don't think the Saints are going to do this. The New Orleans Saints, typically speaking, are not an organization that admits that it's down for the count and that it's out and that it's not, a part of the competition or anything like that. Now, they sit as a 2-5 team on a 5-game losing streak after an electrifying 2-game win streak. And now they're about to head to Los Angeles in a game where they're 7.5-point underdogs, more than a touchdown underdogs, according to our friends over at FanDuel. So maybe they start to get the hint after a little while, or not the hint, but maybe they start to get that feeling a little bit after a little while that they aren't in the running. But I don't see this team doing that until they're mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. I don't think that this is going to be a team that's going to throw its hands up in the air and say that we're done. Now, you can say that that's the wrong thing. You could say that that's the right thing. I'm in between. I wouldn't mind the Saints doing either at this point. I understand the ability to compete and evaluate your roster and all these other things, but maybe at some point you do have to go out there and start trying to get some trade capital or draft capital in some trades and things like that. So I don't think either one is necessarily the wrong thing to do, but I think that that would be the driving force behind any kind of a trade for Alvin Kamara or trade away of Alvin Kamara, as opposed to Alvin Kamara requesting a trade. If the New Orleans Saints were to go down that rabbit hole or that path of trying to make some moves to bring in some draft capital and things like that, they don't have a lot of options in terms of guys that could potentially bring them back some good draft capital. They might have some guys they can move for day 3 picks, and then maybe try to bundle those day 3 picks with other picks at a later time during the draft to try to move up and mobilize a little bit and all those things. Those day 3 picks do help you move around a little bit in the draft. But for the most part, that's kind of where they're stuck. The 2 players that they could move to try to get some better potential draft capital would be running back Alvin Kamara and cornerback Marshon Lattimore. Both could be good trade options for the New Orleans Saints should they have to go down this road. Now, when it comes to Alvin Kamara, the issue is I don't know that you get a very good draft pick back for him. He's an incredibly talented player. He means a lot to this organization. He should remain with this organization, and the organization should continue to invest in him because they already have him. But running backs on the market don't typically yield big draft capital. It doesn't matter who the player is. That running back little RB next to their name tells the entire story, unfortunately, when it comes to the rest of the NFL. Then if you dig a little bit deeper and you look at Alvin Kamara, who's number 15 out of 16 players with at least 75 carries this season in yards after contact, so not being able to pick up a lot of yards after contact. We've talked about this. You have to create for him. That means that he might be better off within another system, right? That might be able to say, well, we can get him those yards before contact, and then he can go and do the rest, because the Saints have not done a good job of getting him those yards before contact. And then he's forced only 13 missed tackles so far this season, which is number 13 out of those 16, according to Pro Football Focus. The lowest being 8 forced missed tackles, the highest being Jordan Mason with 29 forced missed tackles. So maybe there's something in there that you might be able to say, look, he's going to be able to do better in your system because you can create the yards before contact for him and all these other things. But I don't know. I think these are things that other teams are going to use against the typical running back kind of price to try to knock the price down a bit. Marshon Lattimore, I think you could get at least some fairly good draft capital for something in the first 2 days, and then potentially end up being able to, couple that with something to be able to move up. Saints right now are in line for a top 10 draft pick. I don't know that it stays that way all season, but getting some of those other draft picks could potentially end up giving them the opportunity to be able to mobilize to get up higher in that first round to get a better draft prospect, or have more swings at more draft prospects so that hopefully they can start to kind of build some more youth, a bit more of a youth movement with this team going into its future years. But one thing is for sure, if Alvin Kamara is moved, which I am no advocate of, but if Alvin Kamara is moved, it's not going to be because he asked to be on the move. There's no doubt about that. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints bring in a veteran wide receiver for a workout, Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Could he potentially help the New Orleans Saints offense? I'll tell you why you should temper your expectations next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's something that scares you? Something that scares me is the feeling of not moving forward. The idea of like moving backwards or being held back or anything like that. That is what terrifies me. But it could be different for everybody, right? It's Halloween. It's Halloween season. It's spooky season. It's time to have fun with all the things that scare you usually. But what about those fears that you have that don't involve zombies and ghosts and all these other things? Therapy is a really good tool sometimes for helping you face your fears and hopefully also overcoming them, right? This gives you the opportunity to be able to deal with some things that maybe aren't, the fear isn't necessarily facing the fear, right? Sometimes the fear is it holding you back, like what I was just talking about in terms of how I feel sometimes. I don't know, but I'll tell you what, BetterHelp and therapy has helped me be able to put a bit of a better vocabulary to it, although I'm not expressing that right now, and has also helped me to kind of overcome some of those things. So overcome your fears today with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/locked-on today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked-on. Time is a precious commodity, and sometimes you end up spending most of your time where you've got kind of free time, you're ready to maybe learn something, embark on something, and instead you're just stuck scrolling, trying to find the thing that interests you most. Let me introduce you to Hillsdale College. Hillsdale College is doing some work to try to democratize education in a way and make sure that it becomes available to folks that are looking to learn more. You're looking to learn some things about the general principles of chemistry. Maybe you're looking for some literature courses on Shakespeare, one of my favorites when it comes to literature and my theater background and all those other things. They've got that and much more over at Hillsdale College for you to go and check out. And it's all free. It's like 40 different classes, a whole bunch of lectures and all these other things. So you're done getting smarter about your favorite football team. You can go and get smarter on maybe something else that you haven't gotten the opportunity to check out before. So go and check them out today to hillsdale.edu/locked-on. That's where you can enroll. There's no cost. It's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/locked-on to register. hillsdale.edu/locked-on. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints still in that wide receiver market, maybe even more so after the loss of Rashid Shaheed for the rest of the season as he deals with his coming off of that injury that required surgery on his knee. I'll give you some more details on that here in just a little bit. But because of that and maybe some other things going on the team, the Saints are looking for another veteran wide receiver, and they've got one in Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Excuse me. I almost wanted to say Marquez, like Marquez Callaway. Marquez Valdes-Scantling coming to town here in New Orleans for a workout. I think there's a good chance that the New Orleans Saints sign him, but let's just be very clear. A signing of one wide receiver is not going to all of a sudden flip the script and turn this team into contenders. They still need a lot more. So let's just take a look at the whole story here of it, and I'll explain why I feel that way. Look, when it comes to, and look, this isn't about to be me bashing the Saints or kind of like talking like how they'll never be able to turn things around and stuff like that. I just mean one wide receiver isn't enough. They're going to need a lot more, right? So you look at the wide receiver position right now, Chris Olave coming out of concussion protocol or still in concussion protocol at the end of last week. We'll see where things are as he gets into this week. We'll speak with Dennis Allen later on today, but I don't think he's going to be able to give us an update because you need the practice days in order to be able to progress when it comes to concussion protocol, but I wouldn't be surprised to at least see him back at some capacity, even if it's a limited capacity on Wednesday when they resume practice proper. But the big loss for the Saints in terms of a guy that's going to miss a lot more time is Rashid Shaheed. He had a meniscus injury, had to get meniscus surgery. And basically the way that surgery worked is that he flew out to Los Angeles, got the procedure done. They go in and then they basically have to decide, is it going to be a trim or is it going to be a full repair? And you don't know that until you open everything up and then get a look at the meniscus, right? And once you get once you to be able to make a decision like that, you have to know exactly what's going on. And so the doctor goes in, kind of gets a look at it and is like, okay, this is a full repair situation. Boom, full repair. So that means that Rashid Shaheed is out for this season. So he should be back and ready to go next year. He's still under contract next year, all those other things. I'll give you some more injury updates a little bit later on. But speaking with a lens at the wide receiver position, that's kind of what the Saints are dealing with. Behind those guys, they've got Cedric Wilson, who had 57 receiving yards and a touchdown, but a lot of those receiving yards came in the last drive of the game. The touchdown came in the last drive of the game, so some garbage time production there for he and the Saints offense. Then you look at Bub Means and Mason Tipton, who are talented players but are rookies and are still getting their footing in the league, and then the rest of the wide receivers are practice squad guys, right? And so the Saints do need more help when it comes to wide receiver. And I think Marquez Valdes-Scantling, I'm going to be doing that all the time because I'm so used to saying Marquez when it comes to Callaway. But Valdes-Scantling does give this team, a big target, 6 foot plus, 6'3", 6'4", 206 pounds, ran a 4.37, 4.36 or something like that coming into the NFL. I don't know how much he still has that level of speed at 30, but still a very fast, deep threat, big bodied option that can be utilized around the field for you. But I don't think that he completely replaces what you've lost in Rashid Shaheed, which is why Rashid Shaheed was on the roster, right? And I think you still, of course, have to figure out the returner situation. Although I thought Jermaine Jackson, the undrafted free agent wide receiver that was elevated, or rather than elevated, actually signed to the active roster from the practice squad. I thought he actually performed quite well filling in for Rashid Shaheed as a returner. He had multiple big returns or bigger than a touchback returns and things like that. So I'm excited to see a little bit more of Jermaine Jackson in that returner role, but the Saints still need help when it comes to wide receiver. Now there's a chance that once Chris Olave is back in the lineup, that elevates guys like Cedric Wilson and Mason Tipton and Bub Means and all that, because a lot of defenses are going to be focused on the proven guy in Chris Olave. And so that might open up more opportunities for some of those younger guys, but it doesn't hurt at all to have another option in this situation. And Marquez Valdes-Scantling could be a good option for New Orleans. Couple of things to keep an eye out on, though. And one of the reasons why I say that he's not going to be enough alone to kind of re-elevate this New Orleans Saints offense. He's got less than a 50% catch percentage over the course of his career, just above 49%. And he's got a 9% drop percentage, which is like more than double of that of Chris Olave. It's double the career drop percentage of Cedric Wilson Jr., for instance, all that. So I think that like those are the things that you look at is when you go out and you get a wide receiver, one of the things you expect that wide receiver to do is catch. And Marquez Valdes-Scantling, unfortunately, has not been the most consistent in that category, not always because of drops, but this is a guy that played with Josh Allen, that played with Patrick Mahomes, that played with Aaron Rodgers, and still a less than 50% completion percentage. There's reason for concern there. So I don't know if this is the most reliable situation for New Orleans to undergo, but it's the most logical situation for them to undergo. I don't think that they're in position to trade assets away and trying to land another wide receiver. I mentioned that last week, that I don't feel like this is a team that should be in the trade market in terms of buying, because they're not close. They're not one piece away. And so going the free agent route is the most logical thing to do, but you're not going to get players of a high caliber in October, right? And now Marquez Valdes-Scantling is somebody that is a high caliber potential player. There's no doubt about that. But he was just released by the Buffalo Bills after they traded for Amari Cooper. So he's only been on the market for, as of today, 1 week. He was released on October 14th. Here it is, October 21st, the day that he's expected to visit with New Orleans. So there's certainly some good things you're going to be able to get from him. He's fresh on the market. He's the best on the market, all of that. But there are still the concerns that we laid out. The other issue is that like Marquez Valdes-Scantling can't help you on your interior offensive line. He can't help your defense tackle. He can't help you put pressure on the quarterback, right? Like there's still all these other things that the Saints need help at. Like if I'm looking at where the New Orleans Saints have holes, wide receiver is part of it, yes, but offensive line is another part of it. Defensive line is another part of it. We'll see what happens when it comes to the secondary after losing Paulson Adebo. That should be Kool-Aid McKinstry stepping in, so they're probably okay when it comes to their secondary. But what about their linebacker room and just some of the tackling on defense and things like that? Like there's still enough here in terms of injury and ailment all over the place that I don't know that Marquez Valdes-Scantling helps you. So getting Marquez Valdes-Scantling is a good thing to do, but more important than that, you also need to start getting some pieces back. Cesar Ruiz on the offensive line, Lucas Patrick on the offensive line, Eric McCoy on the offensive line. Like getting those players back is going to have a major impact in a way that just adding a free agent wide receiver, just not even about the wide receiver themselves, just simply inherently can't make your blocking better, make your tackling better, make your pass rush better, all that. The Saints have to figure all that stuff out in addition to making this move. So it'll help the quarterback by giving the quarterback another target and a big body target and somebody with good speed, all those other things. But it ain't going to buy him any time. So the Saints have to figure that part out as well. And they might be getting some help, some built-in help when it comes to that. Let me give you some of the injury updates that Dennis Allen gave us in his day after post-game press conference, where he gave us a lot of information on players that could end up returning as soon as this week's game against the Los Angeles Chargers. Let's break that down next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and the only place you should be going to place bets, whether it's for the New Orleans Saints, against the New Orleans Saints, across the NFL, the NBA. They've got tennis, they've got races, they've got college football, soccer, so much for you to check out over at FanDuel. Right now, they have the Saints as 7.5-point underdogs on the road to the City of Angels, taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. And they have an over-under in this game set at 39.5 total points, which means they're expecting something like a 23-16 victory by the Los Angeles Chargers. So if you want to get in on that, you think the New Orleans Saints might lose but still beat the spread, you think they might win outright, you think that they're going to go over that win total or that total points total, you can get into all of that and much more over at FanDuel. And if you get a hunch during a game, you can open up the FanDuel app. It'll give you the latest stats, and you can view live play-by-play on the same page where you place your bets. You also get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet, win or lose. That's FanDuel.com. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation? The New Orleans Saints are dealing with a ton of injuries all around the roster, offense, defense, in some cases special teams, depending on how you look at it. And now the New Orleans Saints are hoping to get some of these players back and to start a trend of getting healthier, something that they haven't been able to do really since training camp began. We saw injury after injury after injury in training camp, and that has continued here throughout the regular season. And not just injuries by number, I mean injuries to significant players and things like that as well. So a lot of that has had an impact on this New Orleans Saints team, as well as all the things they've struggled to do. Because to be fair, the defense has been majority healthy, but we saw some injuries over the defense that could be costly up against the Denver Broncos. And then I'll have some updates for you here on some of those players as we move ahead. So Dennis Allen spent some time with us on Friday, giving us some updates on the injury updates and things like that on his day after conference call is basically what it was. And so we now know some status and the way that things are trending moving forward. So the first thing that I want to mention here is that players that were dealing with injury spent the weekend recovering at the facility. They didn't get a weekend off or anything like that. Anybody that was dealing with any kind of injury designation, to my understanding, was at the facility, including quarterback Derek Carr, working to get healthy. So that was a big move by New Orleans to say, everybody's getting the weekend off except for y'all. Get in there, get healthy. And so admirable, if you ask me, because I think that that's one of the biggest things that has kind of changed the course this New Orleans Saints season have been the injuries. Are they going to be able to turn things around? I don't know. But the injuries have been pretty impactful. There's no doubt about that for New Orleans. You can't tell the story of this season without at least acknowledging the injuries. So let's see where the New Orleans Saints might be getting healthier and where they certainly aren't. So let's start off with cornerback Marshon Lattimore. There are some players that are kind of shut down for the season. There are others that could be back this weekend. I want to start with the players that could be back this weekend because that kind of has the most relevant impact for this team right away. So Marshon Lattimore left the game with a hamstring injury against the Denver Broncos. He also had a hamstring injury earlier on in the season. Remember, that's what kept him out of that Week 2 game in Dallas against the Cowboys, was because Dennis Allen was worried about that one game thing becoming a multi-game thing or a season-long thing or whatever. Just didn't want to take that chance. Here's an example of why that is. When it comes to those hamstring injuries, they're so easy to make worse, and they're so easy to recur as well. So Marshon Lattimore kind of going out toward the end of the third quarter, so it was the latter part of the second half. He ends up kind of having to go out with this hamstring injury, and it's not super surprising because once you've had one, they're pretty hard to shake. So it was a good move by New Orleans to sit him for the rest of the game. But it does sound like that injury, according to Dennis Allen, is not significant. They're not expecting that to be a very big deal. So there is a chance that he will be on the field going up against that Los Angeles Chargers defense, which is 32nd in the NFL when it comes to passing attempts and 30th in the NFL when it comes to passing yardage. So Marshon Lattimore, who has been playing remarkably well this season, by the way, 7 games, targeted only 12 times so far this season. Wide receivers are not getting open. Quarterbacks are not testing Marshon. He has been playing so incredibly well this year. And so going up against an advantageous matchup here against Los Angeles Chargers, be great to have him back out on the field. Another player that could potentially make a return this week, and a big-time necessary return for this team, is Cesar Ruiz. According to Allen, there's, quote, a good chance that Ruiz makes his return against the Chargers. He's been out 4 weeks, so you could argue that he could have gone on injured reserve, but it doesn't matter because what are you going to do at that spot anyway? And so they ended up being able to hopefully get him back after missing weeks 3, 4, 5, and 6, or basically got hurt during that Eagles game and then ended up not playing these last 4 weeks. So getting him back on the interior is great. I know a lot of people are very anti Cesar Ruiz, but he's a better option as a starter than what the Saints have had on their interior so far. And so getting an upgrade there and potentially getting an upgrade at left guard as well. You'll notice that Lucas Patrick, although he didn't practice at all last week, he was still active in that Thursday night game against the Denver Broncos, showing that he was at least healthy enough to be an emergency player if they needed somebody to go in at left guard. They ended up having Nick Saldiveri go out with a shoulder injury. They went to Kyle Hergel first, but you have to imagine that if Kyle Hergel had ended up, then either Lucas Patrick or Oli Udoh would have been, would have been the guy to go in at left guard. So it just shows some progress there. So if they can get both Cesar Ruiz and Lucas Patrick back this week, that would be huge for this New Orleans Saints run game, for their offensive line, potentially protection for whoever will be the quarterback this week, all of those other things. Taysom Hill is another one that could return in this game as well. He is a hopeful return. He has been somebody whose presence has been missed big time for this New Orleans Saints offense, and his contributions to the run game will be very welcome. But it sounds like he is trending his way back to getting back out on the field. He was doubtful last week, hopefully at least a questionable designation this week in the hopes of being able to get him back. There's some expectation that Pete Werner might be available as well, but we didn't get a full update on that. But I've heard good things about the progress when it comes to him, but that doesn't mean that he's going to play this week. So we'll see which way that one goes. Now, for the guys that you definitely probably won't see this week, let me start with the guys that you definitely won't see this week. Center Eric McCoy, cornerback Paulson Adebo. Cornerback Paulson Adebo's season is over. Broken femur is the diagnosis for him, so he was immediately rushed into surgery. Sounds like nerve damage wasn't a part of the reason for that, but it's just something you quickly have to get taken care of and things like that. So sounds like the surgery went well, but he's on a long time recovery timeline here, 5 to 6 months. So that should allow him to be back in time for his unrestricted free agent status. But I fear we may have seen the last snap of Paulson Adebo as a New Orleans Saint, and it's unfortunate that it happened that way. Because he was your most reliable takeaway guy. Yeah, he had all the penalties and things like that, but he was also a guy that was not allowing a lot of catches and was, forcing a lot of incompletions, things like that. I think he was second in the NFL in pass breakups, up near the top of the NFL when it came to forcing completions as well. Number one on the team in interceptions with 3, all those things. So you lose some, you win some when it comes to his play style, but the ones that you win end up having an impact for you if you can cash in on them over on the offensive side, which was more so the issue than anything else. So, but Paulson Adebo done for the season. Expect Kool-Aid McKinstry to be the guy opposite Marshon Lattimore. This is going to be very interesting. Kool-Aid McKinstry played an entire collegiate season last year and was targeted only 29 times at over 400 covered snaps. That's incredibly impressive. And then we just talked about Marshon Lattimore being one of the least targeted guys with the amount of snaps that he has in the NFL at corner with 12. Who you throwing at? You know what I mean? And so expect the NFL quarterbacks to pick on the NFL rookie. But if Kool-Aid McKinstry is getting some more opportunities, maybe he can start to show some of that takeaway ability that he wants to prove that he has, that he didn't get many opportunities to prove last year in his final season of college football, where he finished with 0 interceptions, but only targeted 29 times and allowing, I think it was only 19 catches or something like that. Like, just insane. So no Paulson Adebo. Don't expect Eric McCoy back, but there is progress when it comes to him. Dennis Allen did say that he's on the, quote, early side of his recovery timeline. And so that could mean, as a guy that was expected to be out 4 to 6 weeks, that maybe the 5th week is the week against Carolina next week that he's able to get back out on the field. So that would be a plus there as well. And then a guy that I feel like you're probably not going to see this weekend against the Chargers just yet is quarterback Derek Carr, although it feels like up against Carolina the week after will be the place where he ends up making his return. Derek Carr is starting sort of throwing sessions this week so that they can start to track his progression. They said that it's still not a pain thing. It's a bit of a functionality thing. So they'll figure things out once they get there. But the Saints may not turn to him immediately up against the Los Angeles Chargers in LA. They might be looking to bring him back in Carolina the following week. So it'll be either Spencer Rattler or Jake Haener this week. I assume it will still be Spencer Rattler, but we'll see where things go, especially if the New Orleans Saints offensive line gets healthier. But those are your injury updates here as we get into the beginning of our Week 8 coverage as the New Orleans Saints turn the page quickly to the Los Angeles Chargers. We'll have much more on that all throughout the week, including tomorrow. It's where we start to take a look at the analytics comparing these two teams. We'll get into some film study on Wednesday, Thursday's crossover, Friday, the game plan on how to win, and then we'll have it all ready for you here on Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen. For your second listen, go and check out Locked On NFL. Catch up with everything going on around the National Football League and what was an eventful weekend this weekend. Thank you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.